Good morning, everyone. Happy Pride Month 2021. My name is Kristen Wong Tam, and I am the chair of the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgendered, Queer, and Two-Spirit Advisory Committee. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the second meeting of this committee. The committee secretary has confirmed that we have quorum, so we will begin the meeting. Everyone, welcome again. This meeting is being held using the City of Toronto's WebEx technology with members and staff connecting by video conference or calling in. Because we are meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delays and technical difficulties. Members of the public can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. We do not have any registered public speakers today. I'd like to request staff to keep your microphones muted and your video turned off unless you need to address the committee. This will make it easier for myself as chair to see the members as we debate and vote on the agenda items. Members, please keep your videos on and your microphones muted unless you wish to ask questions of staff or speak to an item. If members wish to ask questions or speak to staff, please make sure your video is on, raise your hand, or unmute your microphone, and indicate your intention to speak, and I will create a speakers list. Please note that certain interactive features on WebEx, such as raised hands, are disabled. The chat feature has been disabled as a communication tool for meeting participants and may be used for technical troubleshooting only. Any chats you type will go to the technical support staff who are supporting this meeting. When voting on an item or a motion, I will ask members to turn on their video and to raise their hand to indicate their vote. If there is a recorded vote, you will be asked to state if you are in favor or opposed to the item. Members, I want to remind you that although we are meeting remotely, we must still submit all motions in writing. The clerk staff are available at lgbtq2s+@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgendered, Queer, and Two-Spirit Advisory Committee acknowledges that we are meeting on the traditional lands of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And Toronto is still now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I recognize that this is a very difficult time for all of us in Canada, and in particular, the Indigenous communities. The recent discoveries and confirmations of the atrocities taking place in residential schools is not necessarily history that is decades behind us, but merely years. And the healing that must take place is ongoing work that belongs to each and every single one of us as we strive for truth and reconciliation. I will now call for declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if you'd like to declare an interest, please indicate the item number and the nature of your interest. Thank you very much. Seeing none, may I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our first committee meeting on March 26, 2026? I just need to have one person raise their hand. Susan, so moved by Susan, thank you. I have a motion from the member. All those in favor, please indicate your support by raising your hand. Any opposed? That carries, thank you. We will now move to consider the 5 items on the agenda. The first item is the chair's report, which I will hold and come back to. The second item is the proposed name of the advisory committee. I'm sure that we will have a discussion on that. I will also hold, and we will also come back to that matter. The third item is protecting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer, and two-spirited businesses and cultural spaces in Church and Wellesley Village. We do have a presentation from staff. We will hold that for staff presentation. Item number 4 is reviewing the City of Toronto's policy governing the use of libraries and city facilities by individuals and groups promoting intolerance or discrimination. We will also hold that item because we will be receiving a staff presentation. Item number 5 is the work plan for this committee. We will hold that because we'll be receiving a staff presentation. I'm just going to remove my mask. I try to do this so often, speaking with a mask indoors, and as someone who's asthmatic, it's really quite a struggle. Item number 1, coming back to the top of the agenda, is the chair's report. As your chair, it is my job and obligation to provide you an accounting of some of the items that I believe are of material interest that appear before City Council, or they are carried out on behalf of the city as city business. Everything I will try to bring forward to this committee are footnotes and perhaps noted topics of interest. The larger item could be linked to an actual staff report or perhaps a council vote. Today's summary is simply to offer a snapshot of what has happened in the short distance at City Hall. So first of all, recognizing that 2021 is a very big year for the LGBT community. We're celebrating significant milestones, and there are several anniversaries for the community. First of all, I think that we can recognize that in 1981, the short summary footnotes would be that the Toronto Police raided 4 gay bathhouses, arrested over 286 men. That set off almost the modern gay liberation movement in Toronto as we know it. That same year, 1,500 brave individuals gathered to celebrate at Grange Park, and subsequently we've been continuing to celebrate Pride ever since. 30 years ago, we saw the election of our first gay city councillor, Kyle Ray. It was also the same year that the City of Toronto for the very first time proclaimed Pride Day. All historical and important milestones in our community, and I want to just take a moment to recognize that. On June the 1st of this year, we also virtually raised the Pride and Transgendered flag. Mayor Tory was able to do that on behalf of our City Council and also once again issue the proclamation. I wish that we could gather, as we have always done so, on the rooftop of City Hall to mark those occasions, and I'm looking forward to doing that again with you in person next year. COVID-19 has obviously brought a lot of other additional changes, including the fact that the Toronto Board of Health has been responding regularly, daily, hourly to the pandemic. Today, as by note, we also reached our milestone of vaccinating 3 million individuals in terms of doses that have been dispensed. Some people have already received their second dose. In order for us to get to this pandemic, we want to be able to have as many people vaccinated as possible. So please, as a reminder, get your vaccines when you can. The other thing that we wanted to just highlight is that at the Board of Health, we also discussed the safe reopening of bathhouses. There was a request from community members to ensure that we can work with the province of Ontario to get that work done so that these individuals as well as organizations can go back into the bathhouses and work with the community with respect to promoting safer sex and other such guidelines. We also discussed the Toronto's Overdose Action Plan. Again, I'm giving you high-level summary notes. There's a much more detailed report in the Board of Health agenda, and you can find all of this on the City of Toronto's TIMIS website. It is of note that the board has once again made a formal request, it's one of many, to the Government of Canada to move towards decriminalization of small drug possession for personal possession, and has urged the provincial and federal government to develop long-term financial commitments to addressing those who are living with addictions, and to assist the City of Toronto in creating more affordable and supportive housing, including those for people who are using and consuming drugs. There's also the City of Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild. This was an office that was established by the City Council last year. It has a task of actually coordinating a citywide approach for recovering and rebuilding the economy and helping individuals from a public health best practice lens, but to advocate for financial supports and independence. The mayor and I brought together an LGBT advisory stakeholder table. Some of you may have been on that in that discussion, or at least organizations that you are associated with or represent were at those discussions, and that report was adopted by council, and the work is now being operationalized. Just about maybe three other things I would just highlight for you very quickly is that there is also the request from City Council to develop the small business subclass. This actually allows us to address some of the struggling businesses on the city's main street by creating a specific small business subclass just for those businesses. The financial relief will be available to all businesses that qualify, including LGBT businesses, including those that are living and operating those businesses in the village. Today we're going to hear from Cheryl Blackman, who's the General Manager of the Economic Development Committee. She will be providing us with a presentation very shortly, but the reason why she's here is because the work that she's doing comes out of a motion that was adopted by City Council. I carry that motion forward, looking to develop strategies to protect cultural spaces and LGBT businesses in the village and beyond. This work is going to be difficult. There aren't too many examples globally. We've done some environmental scans, so the City of Toronto is heading into new terrain and hopefully working with the appropriate staff to help not just save gay spaces in Toronto, but recognizing that this is a conversation that's happening in many cities. Many of you will recognize that we had the Epstein report, specifically commenting on those who were missing and missed from the Bruce MacArthur murders. I think that many of you have been involved with those conversations, and I just want to take a moment to recognize that work is ongoing. It is incredibly difficult for our community, and there is also an opportunity to apply to the Toronto Police, who are putting together the Missing and Misimplementation team that will be meeting once a month to consult on the development of the implementation plan, and of course, most importantly, to monitor the progress coming out of the Epstein report. The deadline is to apply for this implementation team is June the 25th, so that's this Friday. It's fast coming, and you're also invited to complete a survey and to answer and to provide your application at the link that's provided. We are going to take a pause there just because there's a lot that can be said. The chair's report will be posted onto the city's website, exactly where the agenda will be. So the more detailed report is there, and I will bring my presentation here to a close. Are there any questions of the chair for the chair's report? Okay, seeing none, then I will just simply move to have the report received by this committee for information. All those in favor, please indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving along to item number 2, proposed name change for the advisory committee. This is a letter I brought forward with recommendations, largely, and this was a letter that was advance circulated, so you do have a copy of it in front of you online. I just want to recognize that in our last meeting in March, Leslie Lee Cam, and thank you, Leslie, for your suggestion. You suggested that we revise the name of the committee. You'll recognize that the committee is still being called LGBTQ2S+ on the proper city agendas, and so I had consulted with city staff to determine the best way forward for this proposal, and the letter that you see before you is a conversation and consultation that came from staff on how to get this work done. So I just wanted to ask, are there any questions, or if anyone wants to speak to the contents of the letter? No? Susan, I recognize your hand is up. I'm just going to start your clock and you'll have 5 minutes. Questions? Is it a question or a comment?
Question and comment.
Okay, so question to staff or question of the move of the letter?
Oh, sorry, I forgot the procedure. I wanted to comment on the recommendations. So would that come later?
Comments would come later, yes. At this point in time, we're looking for questions of the mover of the letter. So seeing none, then we'll move straight to comments then. Recognizing you, Susan, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Susan Gapka, she, her pronouns, elle, français. I'm fully supporting this. There's some background noise. So that's
Sorry, I apologize. We'll just ask the chair to mute. Thank you.
okay. Thank you. We're still figuring this all out. So I'm in support of this recommendation. But I also want to suggest that we take a review of this acronym, and I'm going to ask that that be added to the work plan later in the agenda. I'd like to see us move towards some international language on SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. So you have my support for this. This is a move, but I think we need to look at like what's in an acronym, and we can't do that today, but perhaps we can do it by the end of our term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you for your comments. If I can just offer you this, if there is a recommendation that will be put forward at item number 5, which is the discussion around our work plan, I think we would definitely welcome that. If you want to work with the city clerk to prepare a motion in advance, feel free to do so. You could draft something up or at least send some point form notes to summarize your idea to LGBTQ2S+ @toronto.ca, and they will work with you as we proceed to that item. Thank you very much. Are there any other members who would like to speak to this motion? Okay, so then the recommendation from the letter is before you. I just want to very quickly thank city staff for their assistance in drafting the letter as well as the recommendation, and just make a comment. I recognize that many of us are community organizers, and there are times where the city process seems a little bit foreign. Why does it have to be so technical? Why do we need to sort of sit in these processes? And I do recognize that it's important for us to accept the fact that we're working with certain limitations here. I also understand that as the conversation continues to evolve in how we identify ourselves as a community, language will change, and of course language is not neutral, and we must consider all these changes with a lot of thoughtfulness. So to Susan's point earlier about aligning our language with the international community. It was something also that we discussed internally, is where are we sitting as a city? How do we say and represent the language of the LGBT community? How does that connect to what is happening across Canada in a North American English-speaking context? And then what does that look like against the world conversation, the global conversation? And I think one thing I can offer you is that it continues to evolve. It's very, very exciting, I must say, especially as someone who's old enough and has been out long enough to recognize that at one point in time, all there was gay. And what it felt like, that was all there was. So even though there are times where this conversation looks like it gets incredibly expansive, what I really am appreciative of is that our community strives to include everybody, which is why the alphabet soup keeps getting more complicated and beautiful and more tasteful. So thank you very much, everyone, for your support. All those in favor of the recommendations in the letter, please indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. So we will be now known as something different, 2S, LGBTQ+ Advisory Committee. And the city staff will make all those changes in all our internal documents moving forward. So thank you. Okay. Moving on to item number 3. Item number 3 is protecting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirited businesses and cultural spaces in the Church in Wellesley Village. We have a very special guest, Cheryl Blackman, who is our interim general manager of economic development and culture. She's here to provide a presentation on this interim work.
Good morning, Councillor Wong Tam and committee. I'm just wondering if the presentation can be put up so that we could begin shortly. My name is Cheryl Blackman, and I am the Interim General Manager of Economic Development and Culture, and my pronouns are she and her. Thank you to Councillor Wong Tam for the invitation and for the continued leadership. I'm just checking on the presentation before I get started. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So this presentation will basically provide an overview of a set of work that was initiated by Councillor Wong Tam's motion 14.8, which is aimed at protecting the LGBTQ2S plus small businesses and cultural spaces, approved by the City Council in January 2020. Work was paused in 2020 as a result of the focus on fighting the pandemic, but the work has resumed, and our work group will definitely in EDC benefit from the advice and feedback of your 2S LGBTQ plus committee. So next slide. So the goal of today's presentation is twofold. It's first to provide an update to the work that's been going on to date, which is focused on protecting the LGBTQ2S plus small businesses and cultural spaces in the church in Wellesley Village. And it is also to gather feedback from you early in the process so that your feedback can be informing the work that we do and the steps that we take next. The presentation will also consist of a brief overview of the mandate of EDC, Economic Development and Culture Division, provide a background regarding the work that we are currently doing in our division, provide an update on the progress to date in terms of the preliminary consultations and research, provide an update on the important considerations that we are going to take as we move forward, and finally, consider next steps. And all of these findings will be presented back to your committee at your next meeting. Next slide. So the Economic Development and Culture Division is a division focused on 5 areas. You'll see 4 of those areas indicated on the slide. The first area is the program that focuses on business growth services, where we look at the needs of businesses and the ability to maximize opportunities through a range of programs and services that target entrepreneurs, both medium and large size businesses, and also business improvement areas or BIAs. Film and entertainment industries is our next unit, and that area focuses on supporting all aspects of the city's music, film, tourism, and entertainment industries. The next area is arts and culture services, which consults and advocates for the city's cultural industries, produces major cultural events like Nuit Blanche, for example, and arts programs, and provides supports to arts institutions. The next area is museums and heritage services, which operates 10 historic sites and leads the development and restoration of 100 city-owned cultural and heritage spaces. And the final section, which is not listed on the slide, is our program support area that focuses on marketing, sponsorship, finance, policy development, and research that supports all of the 4 areas that I mentioned earlier. And so ultimately, the goal of the division is to make Toronto a place where business and culture can thrive, where we can engage partners, encourage a Toronto that it's culturally vibrant, and fostering employment and investment opportunities for all. Next slide. In terms of the background, the work being presented here was initiated with Councillor Wong Tam's motion 14.8 that I mentioned earlier. In January of 2020, it directed the staff in Economic Development and Culture to do 2 things: to conduct a review of relevant City of Toronto programs and identify what can be done to enhance optimal conditions for the LGBTQ2S plus small businesses and cultural spaces in order to ensure that there is success and also a thriving. And also to develop immediate and long-term recommendations to support the retention and growth of independently owned and operated LGBTQ2S plus small businesses and cultural spaces in consultation with partners like the Church Wellesley BIA. And of course, there's a broader stakeholder group we're aware of and we want to make sure we're consulting with as well. Next slide. Further to the background, the motion was also noting that LGBTQ2S plus communities need an opportunity to have a facing of the systemic barriers that are confronting the community and that are really barriers to social inclusion and are also driving social isolation. The Church in Wellesley Village and the LGBTQ2S plus businesses and cultural spaces need an opportunity to have a sense of belonging and the businesses and cultural spaces in the village need to really have an opportunity to unpack the significant stress and the negative impacts that are currently being faced and have been faced for some time in community. Next slide. In addition, we have been looking at the LGBTQ2S+ spaces and other spaces that provide a safe environment for LGBTQ2S+ communities that have closed in the past decade. So this slide will give you an indication of the closures in the past decade, and I'll point out for you that there's also a list of 13 based on the information that was compiled by Pride Toronto and the 519. So please note that item or location number 3, I should say, on the list, which is the hen house, was mentioned a few times during consultations as being an important loss, as it was the last bar specific to LGBTQ2S+ women in Toronto, having closed in 2015. Next slide. In terms of preliminary work and consultations that have happened to date, to initiate the work, Economic Development and Culture conducted preliminary consultations with key organizations and also local stakeholders and community leaders in the Church in Wellesley Village. This included meeting with the 519, Pride Toronto, the Church Wellesley BIA, ERA Architects, and also the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario and Canada's Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. Throughout consultations, a few common themes emerged, and those common themes included the feelings of displacement because of increased costs related to rent and property tax, and loss of character of the area, both of these topics usually associated with gentrification. In addition, it was also noted that there has been a loss of safe space for LGBTQ2S+ communities and a loss of viability and visibility of the history of the community and a sense of belonging. Next slide. In terms of the continued support then, the community leaders and stakeholders consulted also identified opportunities and recommended that the city explore better ways to protect LGBTQ2S+ small businesses and cultural spaces. So 4 of these recommendations are illustrated on this slide. The first being support for arts and culture in a way that promotes the LGBTQ2S+ identity of Church in Wellesley. It was also mentioned that it would be very positive if the Church in Wellesley Village was designated or recognized as a zone of cultural and economic impact in Toronto. And the idea of incentives for businesses that are meaningful to the LGBTQ2S+ community, along the lines of some of the supports we've seen in cities like San Francisco, were also emphasized. And a 4th theme was related to communication, better communicating the importance of the village in terms of its history, its culture, its heritage, and also its economic impact. Next slide. In addition to the preliminary consultations, Economic Development and Culture also conducted research on relevant City of Toronto programs with a focus on the if and the how we would support LGBTQ2S+ communities. And a total of 25 programs were characterized as supports for starting businesses, supports for retaining or expanding businesses, supports for creative businesses, access to city spaces for arts and culture, and supports that promote a commercial and cultural neighborhood. And assessed based on 2 criteria: whether the program has an explicit focus on LGBTQ2S+ communities, and if the LGBTQ2S+ communities are accessing and participating in the program. Next slide. So the research itself, it really delivered a set of findings. And at this particular point, though, there is no explicit focus on the LGBTQ2S+ owned, operated, and or controlled businesses and cultural spaces. There is insufficient information to determine whether LGBTQ2S+ individuals are benefiting from these programs. However, we want to underscore that this does not mean that LGBTQ2S+ communities are not accessing the existing supports and programs, but it illustrates that it's currently not known if these programs are benefiting the community. Programs and services are open and available to residents regardless of gender and sexual orientation, and there are a few examples of programs that capture specific information on the impact of the LGBTQ2S+ communities. And one of them is the city's social procurement program, which currently has 49 LGBTQ2S+ businesses certified by the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce in the diverse supplier list. Another one is the Starter Company Plus grant program, which provided a total of 10 grants for clients who self-identified as LGBTQ2S+. And a third one concerns seminars led by entrepreneurship services in EDC, for which a total of 21 attendees self-identified as LGBTQ2S+ between January and March of this year. Next slide. In terms of current supports and examples that we can share, although there is insufficient data, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, many programs open to everyone to specifically help individuals start a business or expand their businesses include there is this online training that we currently make available, which covers the basics of how to start a business. There is year-round focused learning opportunities. There is one-on-one assistance for businesses to navigate and review and approve the process to expedite commercial projects, and also support for businesses to develop goals, strategies, and plans. Next slide. Further to that, in terms of creative businesses, the city has the Creative Co-location Property Tax subclass, which provides 50% reduction in the commercial property class rates and was expanded to include live music venues in 2020, making venues with musical artists and DJs part of a curatorial role eligible to partake in this opportunity. There was also support to help promote a neighborhood commercially and culturally through BIA's related incentives. And in the case of the Church Wellesley BIA, a few financial supports were created to promote the Church in Wellesley Village in 2020 and in 2021. So the colorful images to the right of the screen are examples of some of the winter activations that took place in the village. And this project was really aimed at attracting hyperlocal and local tourists in transitional spaces, which involved the reimagining of vacant storefronts and outdated signage under the theme of signs of safety. Next slide, please. In terms of considerations, although the city has long led efforts to address challenges concerning small businesses and the need to have more cultural spaces available to local communities, it is clear, based on our consultations and research to date, that the original council direction and the work that we're doing needs to deepen in economic development and culture. So in this sense, there are 4 considerations that are foundational to the work that we're going to be doing in our next steps. The first is that LGBTQ2S+ spaces continue to be in danger of closing despite the existing supports. And these spaces are important for the LGBTQ2S+ community for a sense of safety, community, and belonging. But beyond that, more importantly, these spaces are important to Toronto's economic recovery and to the culture of the city. The Church in Wellesley Village, in particular, is very meaningful to the LGBTQ2S+ community, being an important community hub and tourist destination. It is also very meaningful to all Torontonians. However, there are many factors affecting the Church in Wellesley Village, like development speculation, increasing unaffordability, and also the impact of COVID-19, which makes it essential for us to take a proactive role to protect the LGBTQ2S+ spaces and make this a priority for all of the work that we're doing. Next slide. In terms of our next steps, then, based on the considerations, the immediate next step is that we are going to support the Church in Wellesley BIA with a grant of $20,000 for them to facilitate approximately 12 sessions in the village focused on recovery and rebuild to support and strategize These sessions will provide an opportunity for entrepreneurs and others in the village to meet, to network through capacity building activities, and sessions focused on workforce development, retail Main Street supports, and other supports from the BIA will be further developed through consultation and discussion. The considerations will also serve to frame long-term meaningful options that the city can undertake to protect small businesses and cultural spaces, and an update will be provided to your committee at your next meeting on September the 27th. In addition, a roundtable will be convened to consult with local stakeholders and community leaders on how to further support independent live performance venues, and the city will explore how to expand opportunities to improve access for grants for LGBTQ2S+ artists and artist organizations, as well as provide you a further update on our activities in 2022 once we've met with you in the fall. Finally, although not specific to LGBTQ2S+ businesses, it is also important to mention that the city is currently exploring how the recently announced small business property tax subclass may be implemented in Toronto. Analysis by an expert panel and broader engagement are the next steps in this work. Next slide. So with that, I want to say thank you and a happy Pride Month. And I am so honored to have been able to present to you at this opportunity. Thank you.
Cheryl, thank you for your presentation. I recognize that there was a lot of content there and that the work is still ongoing. I'm just going to turn to my screen so I can see the members. For members, if you have any questions of Cheryl or questions to clarify her presentation, please raise your hand and I will start to build a speakers list. I'm not seeing any hands. First person to question is Lori, then Ranjith. Lori, go ahead. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the presentation for this really important work. I'm just wondering, in terms of the immediate next steps, I understand the importance and the focus of church in Wellesley is a really significant area in our community, but I'm wondering how 2S LGBTQ-owned small businesses outside of that area might be able to benefit in the immediate term.
So thank you for the question. In the immediate term, really across our BIA network, we're working in close partnership with TABIA, the Toronto Association for BIAs, to make sure that the supports that we've put in place are available across the city. So we encourage folks who are part of a BIA network to certainly reach out to their local BIA and to work in partnership with them to be able to take part in recovery-related supports. We are also working more broadly across the city with community stakeholders in different wards throughout the city as well. So certainly if there are opportunities for supports that haven't been articulated through this presentation, folks can reach out to the Economic Development and Culture team, and we would be happy to step in and to be supportive in any way that we can.
Lori, do you have a follow-up question?
I don't know. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ranjith, go ahead, please. I'll just start your clock.
Hi, my name is Ranjith. My question is, this is really amazing work, and I want to congratulate on this work and give full support. The question I have is whether the actions also can be incorporated, or the actions can include pedestrianization of certain parts of the Church and Wellesley village, the village permanently. For example, from Wellesley to at least Wood Street, because that will give a sense of urban space for people to congregate, and the businesses can come up to the street. It will create a completely different space and environment, and that is alongside all the other actions. Spatial arrangements is crucial in the preservation and celebration of this historic area. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comment. And I think certainly this is exactly why we're coming to the committee today. We want to make sure that, that your feedback is incorporated into our thinking. So understanding that that's part of the intentionality and that's something that this advisory committee holds as important, we will take that forward as we think about our next steps. So we're certainly very, very open to making the considerations that you speak about. And we will make sure that as we are planning, we take your feedback into consideration and weave it into our thinking. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Cheryl. Ranjit, do you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm really glad that it is taken into account in the next steps. I come from an urban design background in my previous life. So this is important. Each time I go to Church Street, and especially during the Pride Week, the space becomes completely different, has a complete different ambience because the vehicles are stopped. And that is what is happening in certain areas in Europe, for example. Why can't we do that in this specific area? So that is the issue that I have. And thank you for the answer. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions of staff? If I can just get the grid, thank you very much. I see Burka's hand. Anyone else? If you can just raise your hand so I can see. And Susan. Burka, go first, please. Thank you.
Kristen, can you just confirm comments are later, right? Just questions right now?
Questions at this point in time, comments and speeches afterwards.
Got it. Great. My question was in relation to, and I think you answered this a little bit, Cheryl. Thanks for that detailed presentation. But what do you define as an LGBTQ2+ business? Because as someone who's more queer trans, does not go to the Wellesley area as much. I just think of all of the businesses, for me, I'm always going to name the Toronto Women's Bookstore. Would it have ever made the cut in this definition of capital Q queer? And so that's my first question. And then secondly, when it comes to the data, is there any data collection happening around the intersectionalities of who is considered an LGBTQ business? So when you say 10%, is it mostly white and cis?
So thank you for your question. I think in terms of the definition of business, part of what our team doesn't do, we don't really define what is or isn't a business. I think we leave that to community to really hold that ownership of the definition of what is or isn't. So I would turn that back to the advisory maybe to discuss that. And certainly if there are considerations you would like us to make, we would be very happy to include those. Further to the question about, I'm sorry, could you just repeat your second question, please?
Is there any data collection around the intersections of who is LGBTQ businesses?
Thank you for the clarification. In terms of data collection, this is the area where we do identify that there are definite gaps. And so I do not believe at this particular juncture that we have that kind of detailed information. But again, this is where we would welcome working with the advisory to help to fill those gaps. Across the city, there is a tremendous amount of very positive work being done on disaggregating data. And I think that this is, if this is something that the community can support us with doing, we would be very, very interested in collaborating and working in partnership.
I think that answers my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Burka. Susan to ask question next.
Hi, Susan Gapka, she, her pronouns. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I was going to speak in the comments section, but it was kind of leaked out a bit that we want to do more. So I was thinking of other neighborhoods around the city who, because of the intensification in the downtown neighborhood, might present, I'm going to use the word fabulous today, fabulous opportunities for Soji hubs where areas, because so much of the city's been changing. So I wanted to suggest that. And I also have a dream, I've always had a dream of connecting with colleges, emerging graduates who could do startups with small business. So just wanted to suggest that for consideration, and just really grateful that this presentation is coming to this committee and the work that you've done on this, and feeling that, because the first meeting was a lot of preliminary roles and procedures, and now I feel this is really exciting work. So I'm really grateful that this has come to our committee and feeling that we have a real opportunity here. So thank you so much for bringing this forward. and there's no supplementary.
Thank you, Susan. If I can just get the grid back onto the screen. Any other questions, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay. Seeing none. Cheryl, I'm just going to start my own clock so I can give myself 5 minutes. I may not need the full time. Cheryl, just to clarify, with respect to your presentation, obviously it is still underway. You haven't drawn any conclusions, but when you were doing the environmental scan, looking at other cities, what other tools that they may have at their disposal, whether it's creating financial incentives or perhaps designating cultural special labels and hotspots, were there any notable tools and rationales that stood out that we could borrow from in the City of Toronto?
So thank you for your question, Councillor. I'm joined this morning by Mariana Mota from our team. I'm going to ask if she could maybe speak to that because she's been doing a great deal of work on behalf of some of the research. So I'm going to turn to Mariana.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Mariana Mota. My pronouns are she and her. And yeah, so when it comes to your question, Councillor, in terms of tools that we can borrow from other cities, we are currently doing our jurisdictional scan. We are taking a look at 10 different cities to see what they have in terms of protecting both small businesses and also culture and heritage and history at the same time. We are aware that London actually has created an LGBT charter to support LGBT venues. They have 5 criteria for a place to be considered an LGBT venue. So visible rainbow flag, etc., etc. But we are also very interested in having tangible benefits for the community. So an idea that we are currently exploring is really what tools can provide those tangible benefits, both for arts, culture, and also businesses at the same time. So we know that San Francisco has cultural districts that are focused on the LGBTQ2S+ community. There's also the legacy business model that is something that is done in San Francisco and has been mentioned a couple of times during our initial consultations. So at this point, we're just really considering different options and what we can do that is integrated in terms of arts, culture, and businesses. And you mentioned also that your office has been doing an environmental scan. So we would be very happy to take a look at that as well and to connect with you on other ideas and other also welcome any idea that the advisory may have for us.
Mariana, thank you. Just so you know, your audio was cutting out just a little bit for me, so I'm not sure if that's the same for everybody else on the call, but just to let you know, that's what we were hearing, that's what I was hearing. Just a quick follow-up question, I guess, with respect to the designation of cultural spaces and perhaps the use of and leveraging cultural spaces. Under the Heritage Act, it oftentimes and only speaks to be quite honest, the built form. So how are the roof lines lining up with the walls? What materials are being used? What era it was built in? Was there any historical figures of significance that resided in those buildings, or perhaps there was a historical event that took place in those buildings? Are you, and because the Heritage Act doesn't necessarily fit to the preservation and identification of cultural space, which is the activity that people are generating, it's the social human interaction, what type of tools are you leaning towards? Because this is not a conversation exclusive to necessarily the Church and Wellesley neighborhood, but it's happening in Little Jamaica, it's happening in Chinatown, it's happening right across the city, especially when it comes to marginalized, traditionally targeted groups. So how are you approaching this body of work, and what can we expect from you at the next meeting?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. I think what we are really exploring in economic development and culture is the way that cultural district plans, cultural innovation districts, these types of ideas can be brought to bear in terms of opportunity for recognizing, to your very point, what goes beyond the built form. So we are currently in a research phase, working through some work in the Little Jamaica cultural district to begin to understand what in fact is a cultural district plan. What does it mean? Because really, through the work we're doing in Little Jamaica, that would be the first of its kind cultural district plan in the city of Toronto. So we want to use this opportunity through that work to really think about, what does it mean for a cultural district plan to exist in a city? We are certainly speaking to other cities, including most recently Minneapolis and San Francisco, to understand what cultural district planning has meant in their cities. But we also want to come up with a very Toronto-centric response, because Toronto is a beautiful, amazing city where we do so many things so strong and have a unique character all our own. So we don't necessarily want to model kind of in a cut and paste way another city's cultural district plan approach, but rather create one that is uniquely Toronto-centric in our responding to the needs of Torontonians.
Cheryl, thank you. I've run my own clock. So I do see we have another hand up. Jad, go ahead, please.
Everybody, just a quick question, Cheryl. When you speak about research, are you folks doing one-on-one interviews? Are you doing focus groups? Are you reaching out to entrepreneurs? And I say that because I know that a lot of community work has already been being done, especially during COVID. For example, the Marginalized Majority has serviced 3,500 people in terms of knowing what they want, and many other organizations. So are you reaching out to these organizations that have done so much community work when it comes to mental health, when it comes to prevention, when it comes to community building? And I wonder how that's going.
Thank you for your question. I'll start and then I'll turn to Mariana for additional context. But certainly what we are taking is a kind of multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach. We are looking at as many levers as we can pull to be able to engage and partake in conversations with Torontonians. So that includes some of the examples that you've mentioned, in the smaller focus groups, the one-on-one, the round table. But Mariana, she can add some additional context. Thank you for that.
Certainly, yes, absolutely. Yes. So as Sarah mentioned, we are really trying to take this approach where we consider multiple factors and multiple stakeholders. And so we're conducting research on publicly available information from other municipalities. We're also reaching out to other municipalities and having one-on-one conversations with them, as Cheryl mentioned, to know what a cultural district plan has meant for their cities. And when it comes to Toronto, we conducted preliminary consultations. So we talked to the 519, Pride Toronto, etc. But those again are preliminary consultations, and we do plan on reaching out to more organizations. So we welcome any recommendations that you might have on that as well.
I don't know if I'm supposed to tell me to speak.
No, Jad, at this point in time, we're just asking questions of staff to clarify their presentation. There will be a moment shortly afterwards where I'll call upon members if they have any comments and speeches. Okay, so thank you. Any other members with questions of staff to clarify their presentation at this point? Okay, seeing none, then we're just going to move into the speaking portion where members will have an opportunity to deliver up to 5 minutes to this item. All those who would like to speak, please indicate your intention with your hand. I'm going to start with Elijah. Elijah, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Eli, name pronouns. I just wanted to make a comment, or just wanted to inquire about, we see a lot more development, especially condos in the Church Wellesley Village. And I was just wondering if there's any sort of work being looked into or any sort of policies being looked into that sort of ensure that the retail and commercial spaces that are offered in the base of these condos can be preserved for LGBTQ2S+ businesses. Just to ensure that there's no continuation of erasure of the village itself.
Eli, that sounds like a question of staff, not necessarily just a comment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go back to the questioning of staff. Cheryl, would you like to try to answer that question for Eli?
Yes, and thank you for your question. We're working very, very closely with councillors like Councillor Wong Tam and with developers to speak about, community benefits. But certainly there are limitations to the types of requests that we can make on developers depending upon the type of development that they have in place. We are very acutely aware, though, of the importance of trying to make sure that as we are developing neighborhoods, that erasure does not become a reality, especially with communities who have a unique culture and heritage value to the city of Toronto. So these are case-by-case negotiations, and we are keeping at the forefront of our conversations that make sure that communities with distinct personality have a presence as development continues throughout the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who has not asked a question? Jad, are you trying to get to a second round of questions? You want to speak? Is that correct? To speak. Okay, thank you. Just calling one more time, final round for those who have questions of staff. Not to speak, but to question. Okay, so then to speak, I'm going to recognize Jad first, followed by Susan. Jad, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to put out, first of all, Jad, my pronouns are he, him, sorry, I didn't say that before. Just wanted to put out my help. I am a postdoctorate researcher in Middle Eastern, Muslim, and North African queer culture and gender dynamics. So if folks need with these very culturally nuanced work or a very global staff communities in terms of research, please don't hesitate to reach out. And as I mentioned before, our nonprofit has been leading digital spaces for the past 8 months nonstop, almost every week. So we've been able to really grasp what the community is needing in terms of research, in terms of collected themes. So just don't hesitate to reach out if anyone needs any support in the ongoing research endeavor.
Jad, thank you very much. If you want to send us the link to your group, we'll make sure we share that with staff as well. So thank you. Also to speak is Susan Gapka. Go ahead, Susan.
Sure. I should have made notes, but I'm Susan still, she, her pronouns, trying to get that into my default vocabulary. So this is where I thank the city councilors here who are bringing these motions forward, and just the skill set and the background on that of protecting the Church Wellesley Village, but looking at other opportunities. And what came up for me when I was listening to other speakers is across the city, we likely have historic spots where people have gathered that, and I know that I noticed they have like this tourism piece, post-pandemic. We're going to want to bring people to Toronto to see our sites and the businesses. But what's happened is, and spend money, I guess. I'm thinking of hospitality in that regard, but I'm also thinking of Ottawa, where they have like plaques in front of buildings that used to be where our community members used to gather, often in, what's the word? In closets. I guess I'll go with closets, pre-revolutionary days. So just really want to support this motion, and thanking the people who brought it forward, and just some extra considerations around the city where we've gathered over the years. I'm thinking of Hamlin's Point. I'm thinking of Grange Park, for example, and that would bring, not only are we localized in the tourist area at Church and Wellesley, but, over the year, we live all across the city, and there's such, and so I'm going to stop there for now. Thank you.
Susan, thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else to speak? Okay, Ranjit, go ahead, please. Just start your clock.
Ranjit, again, he, they pronouns. I just want to reiterate the importance of social spatial relationships and how that can be also incorporated, a deep understanding of how social spatial relationships as a manifestation of urban life can be incorporated in this project. And I also want to validate Burka Gupta's point of, and that is so important. And this is where we need some kind of a broader understanding of social, cultural, economic, political contexts in the creation of this amazing space, and not just creation, but also preservation. So preservation is not about freezing. It is about moving forward together while understanding the dynamics of social spatial relationships and how people congregate. So as I think Susan Gupta also said that, so keeping the village as the nucleus, then we can identify other areas that needs to be preserved and who owns these little small businesses, and also promote similar businesses for the trans, queer, racialized Black communities. So I can picture a network of queer businesses, queer hubs emerging from this, keeping the village as the nucleus. And so for that, I see great potential, and as Susan said, a lot of hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranjith. Anyone else to speak? Leslie, go ahead, please. Leslie, you're on mute.
Thanks, Cheryl, for that great presentation. Leslie, she, her pronouns. Just building on what Susan and Ranjith have been saying, so many queer spaces, especially spaces for lesbians, have disappeared. And we have been floating the idea of plaques for a long time now. So the history can be preserved, but also moving forward. And most of the places have become condos. So the Rose, the studio that used to be at the corner of Church and Carlton, which was the Gasworks, is now gone. That was one of the bars that we went to way back when. But this idea of plaques has been floating around for quite some time now. So if that's something that can be incorporated, and also doing work with Rex Pride and Scarborough Pride. Because in the terms of the community work that I do, I keep hearing, well, what about us? Those of us who do not live downtown, those of us who live in Scarborough, in the East End or the West End, we are still queer. And when are you going to come to us and recognize us? So I would strongly recommend, Cheryl, the work that you're doing, you do some outreach to these neighborhoods and get their input. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Laurie, was your hand up, Laura? We just lost you.
It was, yes.
Okay, yes, thank you. I thought I saw it go up. Go ahead, please.
And I think this connects to what was just said, is I want to emphasize that as these safe space communities are changing, often what it's doing is pricing folks out as well, and our communities are being scattered. And so even when we do preserve our community gathering spaces, they're now very far from us because we've been priced out of the space. And so any community preservation work that is being done needs to be married with a housing first and affordable housing initiative as well. Ultimately, if we preserve the community spaces, but the community is no longer there, then we need to be looking at where the community is.
Laurie, thank you for your remarks. Anyone else? Burka, if you can if everyone who wants to speak, just raise their hand so I can just get you all at once. I see Burka. Anyone else? Okay. Burka, you'll be our second last speaker. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, totally echo what everyone else is saying. And so I'm going to try to build on that as much as I can. Going from the earlier conversation, Cheryl, like a strong recommendation to think about how outreach is being done around the definition of who's an LGBTQ business. Because there's a lot of like LGBTQ business owners that like are not in the Church Wellesley corridor, that like might not recognize that these plans or these processes are in place, or not realize that there could be ways that they can benefit from it. The Church and Wellesley corridor, love it. So glad it's there. And also it continues to start to feel like more and more of a gentrified area. And I know there's a lot of struggles there. And also it feels like a tourism spot. I don't know any young person who really feels represented beyond going to the 519 or a few other like localized spots. So I'm also just thinking about what is the like larger context in this around what does support for future businesses. We're coming into a really important time right now where we're talking about what is post-pandemic. We've seen so many closures, and like it's like I think this group knows that the like impact on who can start businesses, who can take on new ownership, who can take these risks has always been hard, especially after 15 months of people losing employment and whatnot. Like, what is this going to look like when we rebuild the city, or people reimagining opening the stores or the businesses that they shut down? And so what does support look like when we really think of too as LGBTQ people, people of color, young people who might want to go into entrepreneurship? Because so much of our culture is in small businesses, it's in small coffee shops, it's in small places. It can't just be the social service organizations continuing to hold the weight. To me, this also ties to safety and safety outside the village. So it's also this piece of like, yes, the village, but also like, what does LGBTQ business thriving look like outside of the village? And I don't just mean Bloor Street in West Toronto. I do mean Scarborough and Rexdale. I do mean like, what does it look like for us to be able to imagine places that are outside the village? So our communities who live, like I live in Scarborough, like I can imagine a local coffee shop or a place. And then there's an additional layer here, and I'm curious if there's any data collection happening around the hate crimes and the additional impacts LGBTQ businesses face when it comes to putting that pride flag or putting that like BLM flag or whatever that looks like. So I have no idea businesses can speak better to this if their insurance rates are higher, if they have to think of other things, and we know attacks are up even in the village. So I can't imagine what that feels like when you're like, I'm going to create a queer business in the middle of nowhere where there aren't other people who will show up for me. So I'm thinking about that and the gentrification of condo development. I often hear this piece of, oh, condos, it's complicated, but it's not. The city has power to make decisions. And like, we've seen that a different book list in the way that the Mirvish Village, and I don't know the details of it, but it was possible to keep a different book list in its original spot. I love Plaques, you all, but I don't want to go to Plaques and be like, I wish this thing still existed. So what's this like impact also of like culture and heritage and leaning on Councillor Wong Tam's piece of like what is defined as culture, what's defined as heritage? When the hen house went, I forgot about the hen house until it just came up. And I'm like, oh yeah, last lesbian bar. I used to go there. But it was probably just seen as a business that got shoved aside when that condo development came in, right? So what is the actual impact when these decisions are made for us? And I'm hoping some of this consideration also includes how intersectionality is being considered. Because even when we think about 2S LGBTQ communities or look at the list on CCGLC, like a lot of the businesses are still being held by white gay men or they're being held by white folks. And so like we are in a time of economic impact and issues, and 2S LGBT communities are not independent of it, of how we're imagining entrepreneurship, because it is also a tourism issue and an economics issue, because I don't think anyone's going to want to come to Toronto to just go to 45 Starbucks. So how are we like, how this feels larger than just what is this business?
Burka, thank you for your comments. Thank you. Final call for speakers. I think just about everyone has spoken. Not quite, but okay. I'm just going to start my own clock and just say a few words. I want to thank, I will move to have the receipt of the staff presentation, recognizing that Cheryl and her team will be back before us at the next committee meeting. I want to recognize that the work is in its interim stage and that what we have here is a report that speaks to the fact that it is still evolving. The reason why I wanted the report here before we receive final recommendations from staff is I felt that it was important that this committee share some of their insights with the staff. And with respect to the work that's underway, I do want to just acknowledge that it was my motion that kicked off the body of work that's before us, but contained in my motion was and not in the title was the reference that we only work on saving and protecting LGBT businesses and cultural spaces in the village. So Cheryl, I appreciate that your team inserted the Church and Wellesley Village in there, but my motion was to really cast a net much broader and wider across the city on how can we preserve and protect LGBT businesses and cultural spaces across the city, including the village. I just want to also recognize that when it comes to certain type of tools that I hope that you're going to be bringing forward is to be as specific as you can. I think as a small business owner, as a former founder, co-founder of the Church in Wellesley Village, I can say that we can speak in a lot of platitudes, and certainly in the House of Government, there can be lots of positive things said about the LGBT community. But if you don't grounded in policy work that actually has implementation, that can operationalize outcomes, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. And so one of the challenges that we have in this neighborhood and in the community is that there's a lot of platitudes coming towards us, but not a lot of resources. And when I talk about resources, I'm going to speak specifically about financial supports and financial assistance, which is really what the businesses and cultural spaces need. So I recognize that there has always been a struggle between, do we subsidize private businesses, for-profit businesses, when that is not generally something that government does. But at the same time, government does seem to do that quite a bit. And we subsidize private businesses, we subsidize large businesses, we offer them tax deferrals, tax reductions, tax abatements. We create all sorts of grant programs. So I'm going to task you and ask you, Cheryl, to you and the economic development team, we need you to do this for us. We recognize that this work has to be big and it's got to be comprehensive, but it can't be cheap, because there is a lot of leveraging of the LGBT community as a cultural visitor destination spot. I know people who come right into the city, get off the airplane and come straight down to the church in Wellesley for a beverage, or to their favorite bar, wherever they're coming from, because they may not have that option where they're coming from, smaller community, rural communities, and when they come to the city, they're coming here. So not only is it an economic draw and it's a tourism draw, there's a business case to be made that we're going to get those money back in some type of tax revenue. So I would offer you that, and I suspect that whether this happens solely for the church in Wellesley Village or for LGBT businesses and cultural spaces, we're going to be looking for these type of innovations right across the city for communities that are at risk. And this includes the businesses that are sitting in Little Jamaica, the businesses and the identity of cultural Chinatown. All of this is in play. With respect to pedestrianization of Church Street and how we use those civic spaces, we are going to really have to get the Church in Wellesley BIA involved in those conversations. Every time we touch the street, there's a constant debate about what do we do about the cars when they come to visit, where are they going to park, and at the same time you want patios, and so there's a little bit of give and take, including working with the community of people living with disabilities, because when we take up public space and put down a patio, we're actually taking away public space that is usable for people who may be requiring mobility devices. And I know that kind of work can't happen without them. There has been oftentimes this debate, and I think about it quite often, because, City Hall sits on the very first Chinatown that was ever in the city of Toronto. So the civic government building that we reside in right now used to be the St. John's Ward. And so there was a real clustering of immigrant people, low-income people, those who are desolate, all within this neighborhood. And ironically, this House of Government now sits directly on top of that history. So there was gentrification, as you would probably imagine it, and that was when government did it to the community. There is an opportunity in time now, I think, that government can intervene and actively think creatively about how to use the powers of government for good. The Planning Act is very restrictive, so I don't believe as simple as we snap our fingers and make it happen. If it was, it would have been done. But I think we do need to think creatively outside of the box, because there's a lot of tools that we probably have at the City of Toronto that we have not leveraged before. And that's why the jurisdictional environmental scan is important, and I look forward to seeing that next report when you come back, Cheryl, to you and your team with the final recommendations for this committee to review once again. So with that, I conclude my remarks, and to thank all of you for your helpful, insightful debate comments. There's no motion before us except for to receive the report. So all those in favor of receiving the report? Okay. Thank you very much. Any opposed? That carries. Wonderful, folks. That was a good debate. We're heading to our next item. And let me just flip my page here. I'm still working with paper. Our next item is reviewing the City of Toronto's policy governing the use of libraries and public city facilities by individuals and groups promoting intolerance and discrimination. This is an item that was referred to our committee by City Council. Janice Alvarez, Acting Manager of Equity Unit, People and Equity, Equity Unit, People and Equity, is here to provide an overview to this committee. Welcome, Janice. You will have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Here, I will share my screen. see my screen okay? Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present today. I will be providing you a brief overview of some of the background information on this report, as well as a review of the recommendations it contains. So to begin, I will introduce some of our divisional partners that are named in the report. I will provide a review of the members' motion 11.14, which the report is in response to. I will then move to an overview of the community consultation process and key findings, as well as the recommendations in the recommendations to council contained in the report. And finally, I'll turn it back to the chair to open it up for questions and discussion. So just to jump right in, today we are joined by a number of divisions who are responsible for administering the room booking and permitting processes, including Parks, Forestry and Recreation, Transportation, Economic Development and Culture, Corporate Real Estate Management, and the Toronto Public Library. They will be able to speak more specifically to any questions about their processes. So the original members' motion requesting the review of policies governing the use of libraries and city facilities by individuals and groups promoting intolerance and discrimination contained 3 recommendations. The focus of the report is on recommendation number 1, to consult with LGBTQ2S+ stakeholders and review city policies governing the use of community spaces in city facilities to ensure that the policies uphold the City of Toronto's commitment to the vision statement of access, equity, and diversity, and proactively ensuring that groups contravening the city's human rights and anti-harassment and discrimination policy are identified sooner, and that permits are denied or revoked where appropriate. The Toronto Public Library has included an attachment to the report responding directly to recommendation number 2. So to provide some background, I will go over the process of how we consulted with community. The first step was designing an approach to community engagement, which was validated by key community leaders through a pre-consultation process. The second step was collecting detailed feedback and identifying key themes through small group consultations, and this was a focus group setting with intersectional representation from across LGBTQ2S+ communities. The third step was to build on the small group responses to validate the themes and to solicit broader community sentiment through an online survey. So the community consultation process highlighted a number of key findings and 3 themes emerged, which were around trust, silencing, and safety. The report was summarized through 8 recommendations, and these recommendations directly informed key actions that were outlined in the report back to council. Based on these findings, the city, including all relevant divisions, reviewed its policies and processes to deliver and uphold its commitments to the vision statement on access, equity, and diversity, and ensure that groups cannot promote racism, hate activity, or prejudice on city properties. Engagement with the community through the consultation process validated a number of existing initiatives already underway, as well as opportunities for divisions to strengthen the way in which they permit and administer to ensure that the city continues to create more inclusive spaces for users of city facilities. So just jumping in, the process for the community consultations and the city review culminated in 6 recommendations that are as follows. The first recommendation focuses on the review of facility booking policies, procedures, and guidelines, terms, conditions, and the complaint processes to ensure compliance with the city's standardized approach as set out in the section of the report titled Supporting Policy, Application, and Process Alignment Across Division. The second recommendation focuses on tracking and monitoring divisional complaints and resulting enforcement actions, as well as instances of alleged hate activity or discrimination that result in permits being denied or revoked. The third recommendation is to develop processes to strengthen the administration and application of room and facility booking policies and procedures to ensure adherence to human rights policies and procedures. So this includes the training of staff and increase communications and awareness to the public of existing policies. The fourth recommendation is to review city-owned properties with an equity lens with the aim of promoting LGBTQ2S+ inclusion. The fifth, I should advance my slides. The fifth recommendation is to consult with LGBTQ2S+ advisory committee to, as necessary through the implementation process and to report on progress. And the final recommendation is for all city agencies and corporations to oversee the use of spaces or facilities that are made available to the public to align their facility booking policies, procedures, guidelines, terms and conditions, and complaint processes. The final report was also shared back with community members and organizations as so that they were aware of the outcomes of the consultations, and they were invited to provide feedback as well. So this is an overview of the process, and I will turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Janice, for the presentation. And I'm seeing everybody back on my screen, so good. All those with interest in asking questions of Janice or any of the staff that are here to respond, let me just read you who's actually in attendance today, just so you know that this meeting is being supported and this item is being supported. We have from CREM, which is City's Real Estate Office, Dominic Popovich, from PFR, which is Parks, Forestry, Recreation, Kevin Carr, as well as Rob Myatt, from Economic Development Culture, Julie Frost, Matt Oates, Joanne Pine. Transportation, we have Dave Twaddle, Sandro Tersigni, and Toronto Public Library, we have Vickery Bowles and Pam Ryan. So, coming back to the members, are there any members with questions of staff? And we do have staff from different departments, as I noted, who are here to support you. Okay. Sorry, Ranjith, I saw your hand go up. Please go first.
So, thank you again. And so I want to emphasize that the Toronto Public Libraries are a huge resource that we have, and it is being used by people who are marginalized, who do not have computers to work at home, including, and those quite a lot of LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers are using these libraries, and these are huge. This is a huge resource for us to protect and also develop further. And this effort is really, really important in that sense. My question is, for the staff, City of Toronto Public Library staff, are there periodic training for 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion, and are those training mandatory? And next question is, if there is some transphobic, homophobic incident happening within the library space, or within a library space, what are the protocols that are there or that are in the proposal stage to address them? It may not necessarily be from a staff member, but of somebody who will be using the library making such remarks. Thanks.
Hi, I can answer that question. My name is Vickery Bowles. I'm the city librarian, and my pronouns are she, her. Yes, we do have positive spaces training for all of our staff. We've had it for a number of years, and just this spring, we've introduced the positive spaces training as mandatory. So, and this training is done in collaboration with the 519. They actually deliver the training, and it's led by our Pride Alliance group. And the Pride Alliance group has been in place since 2013. And this is a staff resource group that has been organizing this training for a number of years. And since we've made it mandatory, they've been helping us introduce the program. And the mandatory training started with the senior staff, and it's working its way throughout the organization. In terms of any incidents, we do have anti-harassment policy, which is based on the city's policy, the anti-discrimination, anti-harassment policy. And we also have rules of conduct that the staff in our branches use. And those rules of conduct is a tool for our staff to address any incidents that are unacceptable, and any kind of discrimination, any harassment, any homophobic or racialized discrimination. All of that is dealt with through our rules of conduct, and people can ultimately be banned from the library for a period of time in response to discriminatory conduct. So that is absolutely not tolerated at the library, and we have tools in place to ensure that the library is a welcoming, supportive environment and safe for anyone who comes into the library.
Ranjit, do you have a follow-up question?
I just want to say thank you. And one of the first things I do when I meet with 2S LGBTQ plus newcomer clients is to ask them whether they have the library membership and encourage them to go to the library. So this is so important that the systems are in place, and I thank you.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful to hear.
Thank you very much. Any other members with questions of staff? Susan, go ahead, please.
On mute. So I have questions a bit for the library, but also I'm just going to bring it up on my screen around proposed recommendations. It says 2 of 3. Number 3, or is it number 4? The review of the city-owned properties with an equity lens with the aim of promoting LGBTQ2S plus inclusion. So to those staff, and I'm just going to mind the time, when we create new facilities, new libraries, new park recreation centers, does that equity lens include things like in Regent Park, where trans people have historically been disadvantaged in accessing city services, especially around things like change rooms and washrooms and inclusion. So as we could staff comment if that's on their radar, and if not, please put it there around when the review of that, because we're currently in where many of the buildings are being redeveloped or torn down and new buildings. And I think this goes across the city for all our post-war, I was going to say post-secondary, post-war development. It's aging, and so as we build new ones, to keep that high priority on the lens. I'm looking at the clock, and it's hard to do it on WebEx here, but if I can pivot in my short time to the librarian and thank them for beginning with pronouns, that's appreciated. And certainly it's on the agenda partly because of an incident, a very unfortunate incident where, which I don't really want to comment on, but you talked about partly because it's very emotional, and I've had experiences with the individual who was granted a permit. I spoke with them. I sat in the same room with them at Senate committee when we were passing our trans rights legislation, had a very difficult time. So I just actually want to say that our library staff are excellent public employees, that they do. I use the library. I just watched Easy Rider from the library. I've been using your library resources. It was an epic that I missed, and I've been watching all the videos. So I think as an access hub in our city for social determinants of health, the library promotes a most important service, and I want to thank you for that. And just a quick comment on lessons learned and how we're moving forward on this, including, so I think I might only have 5 minutes, and I know I've asked a lot, but I really appreciate the time to address a couple of these issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Susan. I don't think I fully heard a question in there. Was there one? I'm just going to help you tease it out if there was a question. Or that's just
I guess
comments.
I did more comment. Facilities, have they considered in the equity review looking at change rooms and washrooms and trans and non-binary inclusion?
Madam Chair, it's Alma Kinton from the People and Equity Division. I know that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that our colleagues from facilities, there's somebody from facilities on the line, but, and I hope that they will be able to speak to the specific question, but I can certainly tell you that in my conversations with Pat Matozo, who is the head of the facilities and real estate team, as we were working towards this report, that was, Susan, some of the comments that you made were very consistent with the work that they're doing, that as they're going through, even doing work related to accessibility and AODA, that they're taking that opportunity to look at building more inclusive spaces, and that the issue of washrooms is very much on their radar. And I should have started by introducing myself. I'm Alma Kinton from the People and Equity Division, and my pronouns are she, her. And so I don't know if somebody from facilities is here, but perhaps in the meantime, maybe Vickery can speak to the question about library, and then we can have our colleague from facilities chime in as well. Thank you.
Yes, I can tell you that we're working on an inclusive washroom policy, and we expect it will go to the library board for approval this fall. So, and we've been doing a lot of consultation in the development of that policy to ensure that it is supporting the LGBTQ2S plus community and addresses all of their needs. So we are absolutely working on that because we know it's an important piece of providing a welcoming and supportive environment for everyone.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else with questions of the staff? Okay. Burka, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just had a question. Also, I can also allude to libraries are great. I think on a day-to-day basis, the experience of the average goer of a library is really great. I want to kind of talk about the second part of libraries, which is the booking processes and the piece related to also as small organizations or when community groups. And so I noticed in the review that part of the process is assessment. And I know recently in May, there was the attempt to do 2 community consultations around what had transpired. And after the first one, because I had a colleague go to it, it actually, the way it kind of manifested, the second one was canceled. And so I understand that these are really complex issues and it's hard to build that trust. And also as someone who's been a small organization for the first time using, for example, the reference library salon space, which takes 3 years to book, by the way, and which is not your fault, but also realizing just how many gatekeeping and hoop jumping there was around procurement and who you could hire and how you could hire and just the ways that it created such a expensive, we would never come back to the library because it was so expensive. And I know maybe today there isn't room for that. But I'm thinking about that second process and wondering how the library is working to build trust with communities for your consultation work.
Well, in terms of the Appel Salon, that is a premium rental space that is different from our community rental space. So our community rental space, the process, first of all, it's all centralized. It's all through one booking process. But the premium Appel Salon space is has more rules around it, and it's a higher cost because it's such a large space. But we have hundreds of rental spaces, community rental spaces within our libraries throughout the city, and the process for that is very simple. The nonprofit rate is very low. It's very reasonable, and we're not booking, right? We haven't been booking because of the pandemic, of course. But when it was when we were booking, our community rental spaces are very well used by local community groups. So if you need support in any way in getting a rental and we can help you with the process, we'd be glad to do that. But I would just say that the salon rental process is different from all the other rental processes. In terms of engaging communities, we've been taking a number of actions, both for the staff, but also for the public in terms of how we can better serve the LGBTQ plus community, but also amplify the voices of the community. And so I'll start with what we've been doing to engage. And you mentioned the listening sessions. We did have 2 listening sessions, and you're right. We had the first listening session. The listening session was to consult on the LGBTQ2S plus service plan we have developed, and we hired a facilitator. Team to help work through this process and to do the consultation, and but in fact, the people who were there didn't want to engage on the service plan. They wanted to talk on the room booking situation, and although so the listening session didn't work out as we'd hoped, but we continue to work doing the work outlined in the service plan and finding different ways to engage the community. So I'll talk about how we're doing that. So in January of 2020, we initiated the development of an LGBTQ2S plus and inclusion strategy. And there are 3 key components to that strategy. The first is we created a new position for our staff, the senior services specialist for LGBTQ2S plus services. We developed a service committee for the LGBTQS plus work that we're doing. And that committee, through consultation, developed a service plan so that we can better serve the community, but also amplify the voices of the community. In the fall of 2020, then we developed a community resources guide for the LGBTQ2S plus community to provide online resources available from organizations supporting the community. And we felt that was particularly important as we were in the midst of the pandemic. In January 2021, we started to our work on the inclusive washroom policy, and that work has involved a lot of consultation and engagement with the community. The other way that we are engaging is the work that we do during Pride Month, and we do a lot to celebrate Pride Month with a full slate of online programs. Normally they're in branch and person too, of course, but because of the pandemic, they're all online right now. And these are with programs, videos, and podcasts delivered by our staff and featuring LGBTQ2S plus community members. We provide reading lists for people of all ages, for children, for families, for teens, for adults. We have it in English and French. And we also host a lot of Pride displays. Even though our branches aren't fully open right now, we've been doing a lot of external displays. So those are the kinds of things that we've been doing to engage the community. And I thought you might be interested in hearing what we're doing to engage our staff and to support our staff who are members of the LGBTQS plus community. And so in May of 2020, when we negotiated a new collective agreement, we introduced a new trans-affirming care paid leave of absence provision with our local QP local 4948. And this provides up to 70 hours of paid time off to access physical and psychological trans-affirming care. And then I mentioned we about the positive spaces training, the mandatory positive spaces training for all of our staff, starting with the senior staff, and that started in April of 2021. And then this past June, and we've also introduced training from the city that we also make available on our through our training site. And then this June, we began offering gender affirmation coverage as a standard benefit through our benefits provider, Green Shields. And it's to support transitioning staff throughout their gender transition journey. And this includes core surgeries and surgical enhancements. And this is because we believe so strongly in supporting the LGBTQ2S plus community, and including, of course, making it very clear that we believe in the trans community. We want to support the trans community, and that trans rights are human rights. And so we are trying to work very hard in all of the actions that we're taking to engage our staff, engage the community, and demonstrate our support.
Vickery, thank you very much for that fulsome reply. I just recognize that we're about 7.5 minutes now. Do we have any others who have questions of staff who are here from any division, including Oma, Janice, Vickery, and the team? There's their entire team of city staff who don't have their videos on, but they are here to speak to any of the particular divisions that they represent. Anyone? Okay. I'm going to just put my own clock on and just ask a couple questions myself, so thank you. Just get that going. I guess my question to staff, and maybe I'll start off with Vickery. Vickery, this report is largely here accumulating from a series of events and conversations that took place out of a booking at a Toronto Public Library, I think it was back in 2019. So, and the booking was rather controversial. Megan Murphy was the name of the speaker. It was at the Palmerston branch library, and it set off a firestorm of activity and conversation within the community. Megan Murphy is someone who's known to be a public speaker who has actually advocated to exclude gender identity and gender expression from the criminal code bill back in 2017. Actively speaks out against the trans community. I guess because of what happened with the booking of the library, it actually really upset a large number of people in the community, both trans, non-binary, as well as allies and supporters. And so I guess my question to you is, given the work that the Toronto Public Library is now doing, and given the fact that you've clarified your booking criteria, will someone like Megan Murphy be allowed back in the library if she was to try to book space again?
Well, we always make our decision based on the purpose of the meeting, and that's the first part. It's not the individual or group who makes the booking; it's based on the purpose of the meeting. But if the purpose of the meeting was the same as it was in October 2019 at the Palmerston branch, then yes, we would. And I can tell you, Councillor Wong Tam, that we went through a whole process of legal consultation. We had an external law firm that we had worked with in the development of our room booking policy, and we consulted with them and we consulted with City Legal. And, we are, we're obliged under the law to allow room bookings to everyone. And if we're going to offer the service to one individual or group, we need to offer it to everyone. And the language of the policy is all based on legal interpretations of that we got from our legal advice. And through all of this, what we have learned is that although offensive speech is hurtful, it's not illegal, and that you can't equate hate speech with offensive speech, and that in Canada, under the criminal code, there's a very high bar for determining what's hate speech in Canada. And so that, as a government body, the library is a government body, we have an obligation to support freedom of expression, and we cannot censor people because of their a speech, whether it's offensive or not. We offer a welcoming and supportive environment for everyone, and by welcoming and supportive, it doesn't mean that there's an absence of possible exposure to challenging or offensive ideas, whether written or spoken. In fact, it really means that the environment that we're offering offers a diversity of views, where these diversity of views are welcomed and people aren't excluded because they hold minority viewpoints or perspectives that receive vocal opposition. And, as you mentioned, there was a firestorm of discussion after the booking, but that was a good thing. That's what's supposed to happen in a democracy. People are supposed to stand up and to say, I oppose what you say. What you say is hurtful and it's wrong, and this is why. And I really believe that when there's discussion and debate about these important issues and controversies, that it leads to tolerance and understanding, and it changes community thinking. That's the way we've been able to make progress, is because people have been able to stand up and oppose offensive viewpoints and controversial perspectives that are hurtful and wrong, and I think that free speech and social justice go hand in hand. And the library is supporting the community, the LGBTQS plus community, in every way we can. We have been long-term allies of the community, going back decades, and we continue to support the community in all of this. And we do, in shutting down one person, it opens the door to shutting down all sorts of other people, all sorts of other viewpoints. And we, as a government body, we have an obligation to allow our rooms to be booked by everyone, unless, of course, they're breaking the law.
Vickery, thank you. I don't think I have time for a second question. That was my 5 minutes. Anyone else with questions of staff? We're going to move into the speaking portion. Okay, seeing none, those who wish to speak to this item. I would like to kick it off. And for those of you who are still thinking about whether you want to jump in, you've got a few minutes. Start my clock. I do have a motion. I will ask the clerk to please put onto the screen. The motion is to amend. The motion is to amend the staff report, and just to make a couple quick changes. Item number 5, I would like to make the amendment that we have the staff report back on recommendations 1, 2, and 4 back to this committee and to provide us their update by the second quarter of 2022. I just recognize how fast approaching these timelines are, and I want to make sure that staff have adequate time to do their work. I'd also like to add a new motion. Motion number 7 is to add a motion that's asked the Toronto Public Library Board to request the Chief Librarian of the Toronto Public Library to consult with Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, and Two-Spirit Advisory Committee. I know our name is somewhat different, but only officially until City Council approves it, and to report back on their implementation process in recommendation number 6 to this advisory committee by the second quarter of 2022. So I'm hoping that we can actually have another discussion, take a look at where staff are with respect to the work that they have committed to doing in the staff report. I want to just thank Janice and the Human Rights and Equity team for this fulsome report. I think that one thing that we can recognize as a learning history of what has transpired is that there are many different booking systems at the City of Toronto, many different facilities that people in the public want to have access to, whether it's the parks or community centers or libraries and other civic spaces, and we seem to have a different booking system for every single one of them. So one of the things that this report will do is to direct staff to clean it up. Let's just make sure that there's a particular way for members of the public, general members, to access city facilities and services, that it is predictable and intuitive, it's user-friendly, and it's simplified. And of course, to adhere to the human rights guidelines as it exists and wherever they can. I just want to offer a comment regarding the Toronto Public Library. I do recognize that it is operating as a separate organization, an arm's length agency of the city, 100% owned by the City of Toronto, but it has its own board, it has its own set of rules, and of course a mandate to deliver excellence and foster a culture of learning. I recognize that 2019 was a very difficult time for the community. I certainly heard from many of you asking, how do we stop this? And this meaning, how do we stop hate speech or the proliferation of hate speech or speech that is akin to hate in public spaces? I recognize that the mayor had specifically expressed his own personal disappointment, so had I, about allowing the physical booking of space in libraries, publicly owned and operated libraries, for someone who is known to criticize and speak very harmfulely about community members, to the point that she's made a business of it, a practice of actually going about proselytizing how trans women are a danger to the feminist movement, which is absolute hogwash. However, I do want to recognize that it is so critically important that as government spaces and publicly owned spaces, I think we can do better. I am personally disappointed by the response by Vickery, and Vickery, with all due respect, I absolutely know, where you're coming from in the intellectual space that you're occupying to provide your answer. I can still disagree with it. And so I'm going to express my disagreement, because I do think that, homophobia, transphobia is absolutely correct. I don't think we need to give it a single inch in public spaces, publicly funded spaces, and I don't think that's how I would define equity, is that we allow one offensive group to speak. We have to allow all offensive and hateful groups to speak. In this case, I actually don't think that it serves us well to use that argument, and even if it's sort of backed by third-party consultants or legal minds. We are the government. We are operating facilities on behalf of the taxpayers of Toronto, and I think we have to hold ourselves to a higher order. If there was an event to be organized, an event to be booked, they should have booked it at a private facility, a private bar, a private restaurant, a hotel room, anywhere else that you can go, but not in publicly owned spaces. So I'm very interested in seeing how this conversation evolves. I don't think we're necessarily there yet, especially since staff are still operationalizing, trying to create a one system, predictable booking system for all city facilities. I know that job is very Herculean, and I want to thank them in advance for doing that work. I will look forward to welcoming everybody back in the second quarter of 2022 when we continue this discussion. That brings me to the end of my remarks. Anyone else? I'm sorry, the clerk just told me that the motion was not displayed, so we're going to display the motion because we need to do that procedurally. I apologize. I thought it was on the screen. I was looking at your handsome and fabulous faces, but I didn't see the motion on the screen. So give me a second, and thank you, Sylvia. We're just going to pop this on the screen so it's in the public record and it's recorded. The staff will scroll down to the area where the motion has been amended, and also show you the new recommendation, which is item number 7. You'll all become speed readers by the end of this process, just as all members of council are. So thank you very much. We could probably take that off the screen now. I did see a few more hands pop up, so I want to recognize we have a few more speakers. And I will start by, if I can get all the hands who wants to speak. I see Susan, I see Lori, and I see Eli, Lori, and then other Lori. Okay, thank you. Susan, go first, please.
I am Susan Gapka. I use she and her pronouns, elle français, but it takes more than pronouns to be trans inclusive in the city of Toronto. I want to go on record as disagreeing with the librarian's latest comments that Megan Murphy has been banned from some social media platforms, and those are private industry. I can appreciate where does the line of freedom of expression and free speech end, and the equity and human rights of our residents and most vulnerable residents and citizens begins. And I would suggest that we lie on the broad liberal interpretation that human rights protection is there for our most vulnerable residents and citizens. What this individual, I'm working on words that are acceptable to this body in public at the moment because it's extremely emotional for me as an individual who would have my life as a trans woman, my life restricted considerably if the law of the land followed Megan Murphy's views on how I'm included in society. I argue and suggest strongly that Megan Murphy views are in contravention of the City of Toronto harassment and discrimination policy, are in contravention of the Ontario Human Rights Code, and in contravention of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which have been amended to include gender identity and gender expression. What I would have liked to hear the chief librarian talk about is how we would review the situation with legal authorities, but certainly the incidents of, and we would make a decision rather than fall immediately under the free speech category. And I am a free speecher myself. But I have lost friends who think that free speech, I will be excluding people from my life that have taken a free speech attitude to public health guidelines during this pandemic. And it's hurtful, but I need that toxicity out of my life whenever possible. I don't see a clock here, but I just wanted to express in the best diplomatic terms possible and be on record with this committee that the library's policy be reconsidered, taking all the new information and evidence had come up. I'm just good. This is when an individual like Megan Murphy books a public space, in my view, that's gaslighting. They could have booked any hotel, any private facility and had their event. But knowing it would draw controversy and resistance, that is the intent, and then claim victimhood once we gathered around and said, no, we don't want this in our neighborhood. So I think I said more than enough. I'm not on the fence on my view on this, but I will be supporting all the recommendations coming forward. And just knowing that, we change, we live, we learn, and that's a life journey in progress. And I want to wish that even people who are not where we are at today can eventually gain that light and that wisdom in life. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Susan. Your clock was running and you just hit it at 4:30, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So thank you for that. Next to speak is Laura McPhee.
Thank you. Laura McPhee, she, her, quay. What I think is missing, and I also just strongly disagree what was said by the head librarian, is that just because you have a right to speech doesn't mean you have a right to hate speech. And that's the line. And governments have a responsibility to create the spaces that they think society should. They have a responsibility to be leadership and to take strong stances and to guide public opinion. The idea that she created a conversation and that was good, I just very much disagree with, because that was not a conversation that was progressive for our community. It was useful for the hate groups platform. It created a platform for them. What it did for us was harm us and re-traumatize us and put us in a position of having to defend ourselves. And for a group that is already marginalized and traumatized, every time we're put in that situation, it does not progress our conversations. It doesn't progress the society's conversation. It hurts us. And so what I hope the city can do is to take positions where they understand which group is actually benefiting and which group is the group harming another group. And that's really important. That harm, that discrimination, that needs to be the lens, the equity lens that this is viewed through. And what that means is, something that was mentioned is that we don't judge the person speaking on what they have said, but what they say they're going to talk about. What that does is erase their history. which is not okay, because we know that no matter what they say they're going to talk about, if what their speaking points always are is anti-trans and trans hate speech, they are going to touch on it in the future as well, and in that meeting. So they should be required to sign a code of conduct. They should be monitored. And if they're allowed into the space, they should be monitored. And the moment they move into hate speech, they should be stopped. If we have to let them have space, that should be the process they have to do as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Next speaker is Eli.
I won't speak long because Susan and Laura wonderfully said what I wanted to speak on. But just, I guess, to add on is that we should also look into creating policy. So then people like Megan can be held accountable for the things they say. And to make sure the librarians can also be accountable for the proper sort of action and governing of these public spaces.
Eli, thank you. Next speaker is Lori Ross.
Thank you. I also have little to add to the excellent comments that have already been made, but just wanted to also register my strong disagreement with this, to emphasize what Laura has said about the harms that are done when we allow public space to be used for these kinds of purposes. I also disagree with the idea that this is a productive discussion and debate. It's something that causes great harm to our communities. And as someone who was one of many former supporters of the Toronto Public Library Foundation who withdrew my support in response to this event, this certainly does not motivate me to go back and support the Toronto Public Library Foundation again until this is rectified. Thanks.
Lori, thank you very much for your comments. Any others who are interested in speaking to this issue? Okay, I saw both hands go up at the same time. So Terrence, I'm going to recognize you first, and then Ranjith. Go ahead, Terrence.
So similarly, everyone has already said everything. So I'm also going to go on record saying the same, and not of support of what the library is saying. So for example, if we are to be supporting our community, we have representation right here on the council from the community. If these conversations are held, they should be held with the community and not opinions from folks who do not represent the community. But yes, it was also a concern of ours out in the Rexdale area. We don't work with the library. One of those reasons was because of that incident, and that was deeply concerning for us. So I hope that we learn from this experience and improve on our processes on how to hold our society accountable in regards to this issue.
Thank you, Terrence. Ranjith?
Ranjit, gender pronouns he or they. And yes, I want to echo all the speakers' sentiments here and put in on record my frustration and even anger that under the guise of his free speech, hate can be promoted in public spaces that are funded by taxpayers' money. And as Susan and many others said, that this is in contradiction with basic human rights. Human rights cannot be compromised at any cost under the guise of free speech. If any so-called free speech has implications on the safety of marginalized communities, anybody, it can be trans community, it can be two-spirit, indigenous communities, it can be women, Black communities, then that should not be allowed to continue. And the concern is that the chief librarians also answer that this individual, Megan Murphy, will be allowed to rebook and continue. So that is where the concern is. So under the pretext of hate speech and legal consultations, if that can continue, that raises huge alarms of the safety of trans people. So where do we move from there, and how can we stop, and how do we make sure that our library spaces do not slip into promoting hate speech under the pretext of freedom of speech? This is also relevant. I just read this morning that on Guardian newspaper that the Vatican urges Italy to stop proposed anti-homophobia law until their argument was the freedom of thought. So this is how locally and globally hate speech is promoted under the guise of so-called freedom of speech, and this needs to be stopped. Thank you.
Ranjit, thank you very much for your comments. Final call for speakers. Okay, seeing no more hands go up. We do have a motion on the screen. The motion has already been tabled. We don't need to put it back on the screen. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate your support. Any opposed? Then that carries. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We're heading to our final item on today's agenda, and that is, and thank you to all the staff who've been here to support the meeting. We appreciate you, even if you didn't get a chance to appear before us on the screen. It's always good to have you visit our committee. As the chair, I just want to encourage you that for those staff who are still there, representing many different divisions, this committee, of course, is here at your disposal and to work with you. So if you have work plans and items that are coming before council, if you want to have the LGBT community to take a look, give you some strategic advice, we are, of course, very happy to oblige. Thank you very much. Our very last item for today is the work plan development, and of course we have Janice back from the People and Equity Department, and she's here to walk us through the work plan.
Thank you, Chair. So during the orientation process, members indicated that they would be interested in the development of a work plan for the committee to drive a more strategic focus for the term. The mandate of the LGBTQ2S+ Advisory Committee is intentionally broad to empower the committee to remain responsive to the shifting needs of the community. However, the intention of the work plan is to ground the mandate in more concrete steps and actions. The committee will inform the general work plan in order to focus its time and efforts during meetings, while there will be flexibility built into the work plan to allow for adjustments as needed. The intention is to establish some key priority areas that will support defining a more defined scope for each meeting and structure the work of the committee towards driving systemic change. So today we will be starting the process of work plan development through an exploratory discussion to get a better sense of where the committee's interests are and what members believe to be some of the most important issues facing LGBTQ2S+ communities as they relate to the work of the City of Toronto. So I think to just as a starting point for this conversation, staff have pulled together a list of some key issues that were identified through previous consultations with LGBTQ2S+ communities. These issues include poverty reduction, housing, shelters, public health, employment, social supports, seniors in long-term care, economic development, policing, and COVID recovery. Through the chair, I would like to open up discussion to invite members to share what they see as their priority issues that will be most relevant in driving the committee's mandate forward for LGBTQ2S+ communities in Toronto.
Great. Thank you very much, Janice. Just turning to the committee members, who has questions of Janice and the proposed work plan? Starting with Terrence. And then Leslie. Terrence first, please.
I'm going to pose it in the form of a question. Can we add healthcare?
So sorry, just to clarify, Terrence, given the fact that we are obviously limited in our term, the CAB was formed midterm. This is not necessarily meant to be an exhaustive list. It's something for the committee to react to, because we are going to need to narrow down this list to prioritize a little bit more so that we can identify maybe a top 2 or 3 priorities moving forward. So certainly we can definitely add healthcare to it. And I would like for folks to maybe engage in some of the discussions to share, react to this list and maybe highlight what they see as the priority issue from this list.
Thank you.
I think Janice, thank you. Terrence, if you do have a follow-up question, please go ahead. The clerk is also going to put the work lists onto the screen so members can actually see it. It's fairly short. It is summarized for your easy consumption. And of course, every single one of these sort of phase 1, phase 2 is much more work that sits underneath it. But right now, we're just having that very high-level discussion. Okay. So Terrence, thank you. I recognize you may not have any further questions. I think the clerk is trying to get the work plan onto the screen. If it's not going on the screen easily, oh, I'm getting the thumbs up. It's coming, so just hang on tight. Thanks, guys. I believe the next person to speak is also Leslie, who has questions.
I would like to address long-term care homes and queer seniors. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Okay. So I'd like to address queer seniors and long-term care homes. I belong to the Toronto Senior Pride Network and now a newly formed Ontario Senior Pride Network. And the Ontario Senior Pride Network came together and we made a submission to the Long-Term Care Commission because so many seniors have died in long-term care homes. And how many of those seniors are queer seniors? And our concern is that there is a toolkit that was developed by in partnership with the Toronto Senior Pride Network, the 519 Sherborne Health, and Rainbow Health. And it's called Diversity, Our Strength. And the 10 long-term care homes that are funded by the City of Toronto are mandated to be 2S LGBTQI inclusive. And we are finding that the training is not happening. There is no accountability. And since COVID has started, our queer seniors in long-term care homes are further isolated, going back into the closet and dying alone and invisibly. So I would like to know what kind of pressure this committee can bring to bear on the city and on Councillor Josh Matlow, who is responsible for seniors issues at a city level.
Leslie, thank you. I believe your question is going to Janice. She may not be able to answer all of it, but I think she can probably speak to it.
Yes, Councillor, I am taking notes. Leslie has noted this for me, and I have made a formal note of listing it as an item that she has listed as a priority for her.
Okay. Thank you, Janice. If I can just, so members, on the screen you see before you is the list of priority issues that staff have identified. Our job today is to affirm that it is the right list. If there's any additional subject matters that we want added, this is our opportunity. If I can just see the grid of faces, just so I can see who has their hands up. Anyone else who wants to ask a question, to perhaps provide a suggestion? I think I saw Jennifer's hand go up first. Is that correct? Or was that just an elbow stretch? Okay.
No, thank you.
Oh, okay.
So Jennifer, pronouns they, them. I guess in response, I think, poverty reduction addresses some of the issues that are highlighted on that list. So for me, that's something that is, I think, really important and should be a focus for sure.
Jennifer, thank you. Just getting the screen back up. Laura McPhee, then Susan.
Hi, Laura, she, her, Quay. I would suggest that I know we have to narrow this down. I think poverty reduction, housing, and shelters all are similar things. They are the same thing. Housing first means we need to look at that first, but I think they are all the same thing. So poverty, prevention, put housing and shelter underneath it.
Okay. Thank you. Susan, go ahead, please.
Sure. Hi, Susan Gapka, she, her pronouns. See, I'm getting used to it. You will too. So I think the poverty reduction envelope around a needs assessment around things like housing, employment are like really a priority issue. The pandemic has really shown us where the cracks in our current system or previous system, hopefully previous system, has exposed our community members from all equity seeking groups and intersectionality. Thank you, people, for educating me on that. Is that, you know, they're sleeping in parks. They're putting up tents because there's not enough housing. They don't have income security. So I think as a bundle, I don't see anything of a higher priority. I will be moving the motion about the acronym at the appropriate time, just to get it on our to-do list mostly, but not to override, you know, getting food into people's bellies and getting people into social services. The other thing that I'd like to ask staff, and I'm learning this new system on WebEx, it's even a little harder, but so I should be asking a question to staff at this point. And earlier, I think in the chair's report, well, I remember we talked about the Epstein report. And I'm also letting you know that I'm engaged with the city's accountability table on alternate crisis intervention pilots and working with the Toronto Police Services on improving their services on mental health and addictions panel. And I'm actually, so I think it's 84 recommendations that City Council had adopted last summer in a very, very heated debate, but moving us forward on that and wondering, staff, if there's room for that to consider, have a presentation, or so that this committee and its expertise could weigh in on some of those issues moving forward. And I think that's my question for now. And I think I calmed down from that last emotional debate and no naughty words came out, but I'm gonna behave myself. Thank you all for being here. I feel proud of myself. Staff?
Through the chair, thank you so much, Susan. I've made a note of all of your comments.
Thank you very much. After Susan, I see Terrence says your hand is back up. Go ahead, Terrence.
Yeah, so definitely support the idea of poverty housing shelter out in the northwest area of the city. The amount of referrals we have to give to local youth shelters is immense. The majority of our youth end up getting kicked out of their homes, and there is not enough beds and shelters available to them. So they're shuffled around all around the city, displaced from their community, going to EVAs, Friends of Ruby's everywhere. So if we can get some more supports on that, that'd be amazing. Tying into the health, as I said previously, mental health also would go under that category. Having mental health supports would also be greatly appreciated. And settlement. We have a fair amount of refugee claimants in our area, specifically from the community, seeking supports. And that's just a broad range of supports required, because settling into a new country after having some traumatic events is a full process in itself, not just amalgamating into a society, but also processing what you have gone through. So I'd like to add that.
Through the chair, thank you, Terrence. I've made a note of those as well.
Thank you both. Anyone else with questions of staff? You can also provide feedback at this point. Okay, Burka and then Eli.
Yeah, you say pick 5 to 6, which to me, I'm like, there's 7, so they're all important. And so echoing everything actually Terrence has said, like, I feel like it's hard to also be like, these are so interconnected. How can you do work on one and not do work on the other? I'm trying to think of it from a lens of like, what does city kind of have more power over, and like what become more provincial issues that we can nudge on, but feel really hard to nudge from a city perspective sometimes. To me, shelters and housing just feel really like, as we're sitting here, encampments are being attacked right now. And like, there's a huge like issue around what's happening around poverty reduction and housing. So to me, those feel really important. And do you want to name, when it comes to shelters, it has to go beyond just like safety of queer and trans communities in shelters, but also the lack of shelters and the lack of actual meaningful, like more transitional housing spaces for young people, especially. So to me, those go hand in hand. And if there's any room to also talk about economic impacts, like as I see, like literally see videos of 80 cops going into an encampment and the cost of that versus the actual cost of housing. So if there's any ways to also talk about it from an economic perspective, that would be amazing.
Thank you, Burka. Eli, then Ranjith.
I think Burka sort of covered this, but I just recognize that like public safety is not sort of on the list of priorities and issues, and I feel like that's probably because it can be addressed under each of the categories. So I just wanted to highlight, just to reinforce that should be something to be looked at under each of the categories, because I feel like that's something that's very important and can be looked at through just the various different ways and intersecting with different of the categories that are presented there.
Thank you, Eli. Ranjith?
Ranjit again, they gender pronouns. I want to add to Leslie Lee Camp's comment on the seniors care, and there has been some great research done on this is a report, LGBTQI communities and home care in Ontario, a project report, and this was done by Andrea Daly, a team led by Andrea Daly, a professor at York University Social Work Department at that time. So this has an amazing one-page list about queering home care, and this can be added. So in our also approach, I would like to suggest that we take intersectional anti-oppression approach in our conduct, in our policy recommendations, and so on. So intersectionality and anti-oppression framework that informs our conduct, our suggestions and policy recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjith. Final call. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no more hands up. Janice, I'm just going to offer you a couple of suggestions, and they're kind of tied. Maybe one to reinforce what was just said by Eli around public's. I think the word was personal safety, but I'm just going to expand it to community safety and well-being. Obviously, we've had some homophobic attacks and queer bashing, quite notable, very high profile. And I think that we need to understand what would be the city's response when someone wants to come forward and report, and how can we actually do more to design public spaces that could, of course, eliminate some of this criminal activity, but also what is the bystander response? So the state response, the individual neighboring response. I'm just really curious to know whether or not we did everything we could to support these individuals, whether it's common street harassment or actually being physically assaulted, and also recognizing sometimes the police is not the place of safety for the members of the community. And we can make sure that it's the work around community safety and well-being, that the physical plan that's actually being developed. I'm very interested in knowing whether or not there's an LGBT lens, LGBTQ2S+ lens, that's going to be embedded in that report, which I believe is going to council at the end of this year. The other thing I would offer is maybe just to reinforce what was said at the beginning of our discussion regarding the preservation of cultural space and creating financial incentives to support small business. It would fall squarely under the economic development lens, but I do think that because staff are already working on this particular subject matter. We very much wanted to, I would very much want it to be traced back through this committee where we can. And that's it from me. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Janice. I saw you taking notes. Thank you for that. Just to speak, I want to just invite Susan. Susan, you have a motion to place, so if you can put that motion before us now and speak to the motion, please.
I'm waiting for
the clerk
motion.
The clerk will put it on the screen for you when you say you're ready to move it.
So here's the motion that I'm moving. Thank you, clerk, for helping word it. I'll read it out. That the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit, but soon to be two-spirit, lesbian, gay, trans, queer advisory committee include a review of the committee name and acronym in the committee's work plan to ensure the city is relevant to today's society and needs. And if I understand committee rules of procedure, that it doesn't need a seconder, but we will vote on this. And I don't see who we call ourselves is more important in addressing the social determinants of health and poverty reduction. But I do want to hold on to this conversation and urge people to vote in favor of it, so that we can have that conversation. Coming into this committee midstream, 2 years into a 4-year term of council, means that some of this work that can't be prioritized today or in the next year or two, we're just beginning to uncover some of this, as the committee hasn't existed for more than 15 years. So that's the rationale behind that. There's so much. If we made a list of things we want to do, it would be a long, long list. But through this process and by working together, that would, and the key word that keeps coming up for me, and I'm looking at people in the screen that I've worked with before, and just, keeping in mind the intersectionality as we move forward, so that no one is left behind in our communities, in our city.
Thank you, Susan. Anyone else to speak? Leslie, go ahead, please. Leslie, I apologize. You're still muted.
About that. So Leslie here. And in addition to public and community safety, one of the things I'd like to find out is how our committee can connect with the Anti-Racism Directorate. They did a presentation for the Ministry of Seniors Affairs Liaison Committee about 2 weeks ago, and they briefly touched on hate crimes as part of the work of the Directorate, but there was no mention of transphobia, biphobia, homophobia, or lesbophobia. And when I raised the question, I was told, well, we're looking at expanding our definition of intersectionality. So I'd like to find out how we can get some sort of voice at that table when there is this body that's set up by the government to look into hate crimes and anti-racism in the city and in the province, but there's no connection to 2S LGBTQI communities.
Leslie, thank you. I think that was more of a question than a comment, and your question is going to staff, I'm assuming?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Leslie. To clarify, is this the provincial directorate?
Yes, the Anti-Racism Directorate.
Okay, that is an excellent question. I'm not really sure in terms of the rules of procedure how that would work in terms of different orders of government. So I will take your question away and work with staff to develop a response and get back to you.
Thank you.
I see that Alma has popped onto the screen. Perhaps Alma can give us a hand with an answer.
Good afternoon. It's Alma Kinz again from She, Her. So like
Janet said, it is a provincial office, but we have certainly collaborated with them on other things in the past. So we are certainly happy if there is a particular topic of interest to this committee that we can reach out to them to see if they would be willing to come to a future meeting to present and to take questions from the committee. So there isn't a formal process for that, but we can certainly make the request.
Thank you so much. It would be very helpful given what's been happening recently in the city with hate crimes towards us.
Thank you, Leslie.
We'll make a note of that and follow up.
And thank you, Alma. Anyone else to speak? Final speakers? Okay. Seeing none, I do have a motion I'd like to put onto the screen. If the clerk can please provide me some assistance. And the motion is that this committee requests the Director of Equity, Human Rights, People and Equity develop a list of priority issues of interest based on this committee's discussion to be shared back with the committee to inform its development of a strategic work plan. So largely it's giving formal direction to the work that the staff have already been taking notes on. I just want to recognize that, you know, this is a very important committee. We fought, I know I certainly did, and was widely supported by Councillor Ainsley over the past couple years to make sure that this committee is, number one, reconstituted and providing strategic advice to council, and also to the different staff divisions who are here to support us. I do want to recognize that some of the things that we probably want to keep in mind as a committee is to try to stay within the municipal lane. We could probably comment on a lot of what's happening at the provincial and federal level, and certainly we would have a right to have a say, but unfortunately we don't have as much influence over them as we do here. And just to recall, our recommendations will go to the executive committee, which is chaired by the mayor, and chairs of each respective standing committee, which means that our recommendations will have their set of eyeballs on it before it goes to city council. So the intention of this committee is to do everything it can to influence city policy, city operations, services, and programs as we design it for members of the public. So therefore, anything that is attached to the city that is a requirement of city delivery of service, that's what we want to influence. We want to put an LGBT lens over that and to make sure that when staff are out operationalizing the service, when they're working with our community partners, that they do so with a mindset that the service and the provision of the design of programs has got to be broad and inclusive. So I want to just sort of note that the work that's before us is rather important. And if we're going to do this work, I think the best thing for us to do is be really strategic on how we approach it so that we can say at the end of 2 years, you know, when it comes to the end of this committee's term, is that we can point to 5 or 6 or 7 things that we had our hands on as a committee, whether it's the poverty reduction strategy, making sure that there are specific supports for those who are disproportionately affected, and that would include trans individuals and non-binary folks, people who are from the BIPOC community, because right now it speaks a bit too generally. And so therefore, it's a bit of a one-size-fits-all approach, and I'm hoping that we can put an LGBT lens over the policy, so therefore the recommendations will meet our community where we need to be met. The same would go with respect to housing. We're building a lot of supportive housing right now in the City of Toronto. We're on a fast track to building more housing units overall. We haven't built as many since the 80s, for example, just when all 3 orders of government used to work together. And so we were able to achieve quite a bit, but now that the City of Toronto is coming back into the housing game, the question before us is how many of these units are going to be housing new homes for LGBTQS people. And right now, I don't think there is a way for us to track it. So that's the kind of work that I'm hoping this committee will do, is that we push staff and push the divisions to make sure that our community gets a piece of the pie. And if we don't be specific, I don't think that it will happen. It won't happen. Sorry, that was a bit grammatically incorrect. So, but I'll leave my remarks there. Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the mover? Okay. Seeing none, then we do have 2 motions before us. Would it be okay if we voted on them together and take them as a package? I'm seeing some nods. All those in favor of the 2 motions, if you can indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. So that brings us to the end of our agenda, correct? Yes? Getting some thumbs up. So we do have some members who were not able to join us. We're going to put their names on the screen and we're going to vote to excuse them. It's a formality at the City of Toronto. We're not trying to shame or blame anybody. It just has to be done procedurally. And while that happens, I see, hang on before you pop it on the screen, I saw Leslie's hand go up. Okay, so these are the members who actually called in and said that they weren't able to be here. We'd like to excuse Ashante Frey and Samantha Peter from this meeting. If I can get the screen back up so I can see the faces of our members. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. Leslie, I saw your hand pop up again. I was a little bit slow to recognize it, so go ahead, the floor is yours.
Just a quick comment. We elected a community co-chair at our first meeting, and I'm wondering what their role is going to be moving forward with the work plan and working with you and working with us.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And it's great to have that question. Laurie, your role is to work with the city staff and myself, but largely in the absence of the chair being able to chair the meeting, we would anticipate and invite you to step in. So as to help us keep the dialogue going, to keep the meeting and the business of the committee moving in an orderly fashion. So that's the big primary outcome of that role. Is that helpful, Leslie? Is that helpful to you, Laurie?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted us to get some clarification.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you for your question. Susan, is that your hand going up? Question, comment?
We're at time. I forgot to mention that the Trans Coalition Project has just launched an employment barrier survey, and I'm wondering if I go through the city clerk to get permission to share that with members here so they could send their members. I don't know what procedure to follow for that.
Thank you, Susan. For any of the members, this would be for any of the members who want to see information disseminated to the other members of the committee, please send that along to the clerk and put a note and say, please disseminate, and we'll be very happy. The clerk will be very happy to help you parse that out.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Ranjit, go ahead. Maybe we'll just leave it open for 5 minutes of discussion. I know it's kind of hard when we're so regulated according to the agenda. Ranjit, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is Ranjit, and in relation to Councillor Wong Tam's discussion or motion about housing, I also want to add to that the need for 2S LGBTQ plus inclusive shelters, especially the shelters. I work with LGBTQ plus refugee and newcomers, and I have had clients who have ended up at hospitals being assaulted, physically assaulted, and face violence at some of the shelters in Toronto. So, and quite often they face transphobia, hugely transphobia, homophobia, and newcomer phobia. That is partly or mainly because of racism and so on. So how do we also include that into that housing, building housing network from a queer intersectional point of view? That is something to be added and into our discussions. Thank you.
Ranjit, thank you. I think because Janice has already taken a note that shelter is of interest to this committee, there will most likely be an invitation to the various divisional staff to present their strategies to us. So, for example, we would invite the SSHA staff, which stands for Shelter Support, Housing and Administration staff, to come and provide us a presentation on their shelter strategy. The staff will be able to give you some updates on where that is, their process report, and also at that time, this is where the committee can then influence that report. This allows us to have a discussion that's focused on LGBT equality and inclusion. So for example, that same report will go to the Community and Economic Development Committee, but you'll then be in a standing committee with everybody else who wants to speak on that item. This space gives us lots of time to focus and drill down and say we want to talk about LGBT access. So that's what this committee is for, and this is the right place for it. So they will be bringing that report to us in the near future. And hopefully that is helpful. Anything else, folks, before we wrap up? No? Okay, so then in that case, I just want to wish everybody a happy Pride. There are restrictions, of course, of how we get to celebrate. I wish we could do it on the streets and maybe organize the world's biggest group hug, because I think we deserve it. But I think I'm going to share with you my Pride plans. I'm going to gather 10 individuals who are friends, and we're going to go sit in a park and do a picnic. And that will hopefully maybe be symbolic of the first gay picnic. And hopefully that's something you folks can do as well. However you're choosing to celebrate Pride, please hold your dear ones, your given and chosen family, and let this be a really great Pride. And we look forward to seeing you again when we meet in the autumn. So thank you very much, everyone, for all your contributions. We recognize that we couldn't do this work at the city without you. Take care.
Happy Pride, everyone.